So I recently posted my latest album, Horizons, on my YouTube channel. And one of the things that I wanted to do was post like session breakdowns or not really like tutorials, but just kind of jump into some of the different project files and show how I mixed guitars, bass, drums. I used GetGood drums. A lot of people seem to have trouble mixing that and routing that and stuff. So what I wanted to do was go through and just kind of show how I did these different things, how I recorded different things, and maybe it'll be an informative video for somebody, maybe it will be educational, maybe somebody will comment and I'll learn a couple things. I just thought it's the kind of video that I like to watch, so I would throw my own version of it out there and kind of see what happens. So yeah, let's get into it. So to start off here, I've got my guitar. This is the only guitar that I used on this album. It's a Epiphone Les Paul. I call it a Les Paul Standard. There's a bit of a story behind it. I've done a lot of modifications to it, replaced all of the hardware with gold hardware, including even the screws and stuff. Replaced the tuners with Keystone tuners because I like them better. Replaced all of the electronics and the pots. So the pots are CTS pots, full size. And then the pickups are Tom Anderson H3 Plus and H1 minus. The story is I got it and I took it to a local guitar center to have it, the pickups put in it. And I was quoted on it taking 2 weeks, and it ended up taking like 6.5 weeks. And by the end of it, the guy kind of stopped responding to my emails. I would have to call, and then finally it was ready to go pick up. We went to go pick it up, and the pickup rings were installed backwards, and the wiring inside was just a giant catastrophe. So I ended up, because I'm a clown and I don't like confrontation, I just paid the price and took it to a different shop, and they fixed it and made it better. But now the switch is going out. I do need to have it looked at again and get the switch taken out. But yeah, it was a giant hassle. But I finally got it. Sounds good. If you know those pickups, then you know that this is like a Billy Howardell kind of tribute guitar. It's intonated for C sharp standard, which is like standard tuning, but you drop everything down 1.5 steps. Yeah, so as far as all the tones, they're coming from the AxeFX 2. There is no actual amp or cab going on here. And every patch started off with my basic Billy Howardell patch. So for the distortion tones, we've got a Friedman BE amp model. Here are the settings that I use. And then that goes into the cab model, which is using a 1960V Marshall cab. And these are actually, let me pull them up here. So these cab impulses are from 3 Sigma Audio. They're pretty good company. I like them. They're fairly inexpensive and they sound great. So we're using the 1960V. Here you can see the list of like microphones and the preamp that they use to record the impulse with. And then I'm using 4 and 3B. So B is just certain type of like preamp response. And then I'm using 3, which is closer to the cone, and then 4, which is kind of like in the middle, just to give it some variation. And you can see those are slightly panned a little bit differently, just to give it a little bit bigger of a sound. Where you know, like if you had an actual cab, you would record it with like 2 microphones. At least sometimes you have more microphones like further back in the room to get a different sound, and then you kind of mix them all together. And then I have a parametric EQ here at the end, which is just a mid scoop. And the big spaces here are so I can do a bunch of effects in front of the amp model. So it acts as like if you had pedals in front of your amp. And then I have a bunch of empty spaces for effects after the amp model, but before the cab. And that sort of acts like if you had a bunch of effects pedals or some rack unit effects between, in the effects loop of the amp. So in between like the amp and the cabs. So I'm just kind of replicating a little bit of that sound. And I have the send and return blocks just so that I can extend my availability of empty blocks here for just tons of effects. So as for the actual sound, here is the bridge pickup. And then here is the neck pickup. And then if I leave it on this amp channel and just turn down the volume, sort of cleans up a bit. If I do that on the bridge, it cleans up, but not quite the same because the bridge is a little bit higher and a little bit hotter anyway. And then if I turn them both full and then turn the tone off, we can hear how that sounds real quick. So bridge, tone off. And then the neck with the tone off. One of my favorite things about it is when you use the neck pickup, if you play like on the higher registers, you get this really interesting sort of like hollow kind of tone. I don't know how else to describe it. If I turn the volume down, we can hear it a little bit more even. So those are the basic distortion sounds. And then if we flip back over here. So when I do clean amp, I always use the compressor here. And then the clean amp model, I'm not changing the cab at all. It's the Fender Twin style amp model, just a super basic, clean, very clean sound. That's at full volume too. And if I move to the bridge, but to illustrate that the tone I like on the neck pickup, if I just throw these effects on here real quick. Just sounds great. One of the other things that is all over this album is an EBow. If you don't know what this is, looks like this. Uses a 9-volt battery and I believe a spinning magnet on the inside, and it's like it vibrates the string automatically. So and you can set it to vibrate at the like normal frequency or the like harmonic frequency. So it's really great for like faking feedback. Really great for that. Or I really love to layer it in with all these different effects. Let me switch to the dirty neck pickup. if I switch it to the harmonic mode. Fantastic secret weapon. You can, usually what I did was just layer a bunch of them, you know, have 4 different tracks going on where I'm playing like kind of the same thing, doing different bends or like moving it around to get different tones, and then just drench those in reverb, and it just like makes this huge soundscape sound. And I did that quite a bit. I think there's EBO on every single track. So that's sort of it for just the basic guitar tones. Alright, so now I've switched over to my bass. So I used one bass on the album. It's a 4-string bass. It's the the ridiculously named, it's like Sterling by Music Man, Ernie Ball, Stingray, Ray 4. It's like the cheap baby version of a Stingray. So it's got the single humbucker pickup, 3-way tone controls. I think one does high pass, one does low pass, and then one does volume. I leave them all at max all the time. Yeah, and then I use specific bass picks that are a little bit thicker. That's really it as far as the AxeFX patch goes. So same thing, all of the tones all the time come from the AxeFX. Here we can see it's my perfect circle bass. It's just the tone that I wanted for this particular album. I'm usually, because of my love of the band Tool, I'm usually guilty of throwing way too many effects on bass. So for this album, I really wanted to keep it pretty simple and a little bit pulled back with the bass lines, and focus more on like the actual bass lines instead of just throwing effects on them. So we've got the amp model, which is a Mesa 400 amp model. And here's my settings. And then the cab, 3 Sigma audio, Mesa Powerhouse 8x10, which is a great cabinet, great cab response. We can see the microphones they used here, just like on the 412 for the guitars. And the mic positions, let's see, I'm using 3A, so right on the cone. And that just gives a little bit more of like a treble biting kind of tone. And then we can see this kind of weird thing I've got going on. So the signal splits and goes into a parametric EQ, and then it joins up with the cab after the fact. And what this does is it sort of replicates like having an amp and a cab mic'd up, and then also a DI signal. When I was setting this up, I didn't intentionally want to not record a DI signal, which is kind of like blasphemy when you're recording bass tones. But I set this up to make it sound good in the moment, and then for the entire album just decided that it sounds good how it's coming out of the AxeFX, and I don't need to record 3 different signals and mix them together and deal with phase and all that. It just is what it is, and it sounds good. So the parametric EQ here is kind of mimicking like a DI signal. We've just got some EQ going on the dry bass, and then it mixes in with the amped and cab sound here. And then we really only have 3 effects, chorus, delay, and reverb, and I would be hard-pressed to remember where I even used reverb. I think I know at least one place where I put delay, chorus a couple of times. I don't know if I used any drive, but possibly, and that's really it. So as far as how the bass sounds by itself, make sure everything's maxed out here. So this is how the signal comes out of the AxeFX. Kind of clean, kind of Tool-ish, I guess. Doesn't help with my playing, which is very Tool-like, but If I killed this like DI, fake DI real quick, you can hear how that sounds. If I bring that back in. So it just kind of makes it sound a little bit clearer, and obviously it's adding bass and treble, and you can hear that, but it just kind of like refines it a little bit and makes it a little bit cleaner and clearer to listen to. And that's really it for the bass tones. There's a little bit more that goes on mixing wise to get them to sound really, really good, but that's how they were recorded coming out of the AxeFX for the whole thing. So. Alright, so now we'll jump into the project session and go through the drum setups and then the mixing for the guitar and bass. So for the drums, so I'm using Invasion by GetGood drums. It's a really, really cool drum kit. It's really deeply sampled, and it includes several different like sources of microphones that you can then route out and mix as if you would a real drum set. So if we look over, so we've got like close for the kick, some sub and trigger samples, got overheads. You know, we've got the room mics here. Same thing with the snare and the toms, all have the same thing. Cymbals are a little bit less deeply sampled, but we've got overheads in the room, and then you can even change the mix of the cymbals. So it's just very deeply sampled and like very well thought out, and you can output all of these to different tracks. So what I've done is I'll go over here to my activate outputs. You can see I've activated all of these different outputs, and then we can see them here in the project. So the MIDI track that I have here is a MIDI performance that I got from the drummer that's on most of the album. Her name is Giovanna. I have a link to her YouTube channel in the Horizons YouTube video, and I'll put a link also in this video. You can find her on Fiverr, you can find her on YouTube, on Instagram, all that kind of stuff. She's super talented drummer from Brazil, and every time I sent her a track, she just like nailed it, knocked it out of the park the first time, every time pretty much. So what I would do is I would get her MIDI performance here from her electronic drums, and then I could plug them in, and then and then the cool thing about having the MIDI is that I could move things around. Like say there's a portion where she's hitting the crash every like 8th beat, or I don't know, whatever. And if I didn't like the way that sounded, I could just move that to a different. Here, let me. Just move it to a different cymbal. You can adjust velocity of the entire performance. You can do all kinds of cool stuff. And that was really one of the reasons why I wanted to find a drummer that did MIDI files. It was so that I could, A, keep the sound consistent if I didn't use the same drummer for every track, which there is one track that I programmed. Didn't play, I can't play drums, but I programmed them, and then the rest of the tracks with drums are from her. And it was important to me that it sounded consistent between song to song, and you didn't get like one that sounds like somebody recorded it in their garage, and then another track where it sounds like somebody recorded it in like a professional studio. I really wanted to keep everything sounding consistent, so it sounds like the same kit, and it sounds like the same album, and the same like group of works together. And then also just having the option to like retime things or take things out or move things around, which I did a little bit, not a lot. Sometimes it was like a couple of symbols that I would just switch to a different symbol. There is one track where I tweaked the performance a bit and just moved things to different parts of the kit for what I thought personally would work better for the song. And I'll get into that when we get to that song. So, but on this one, it's all her. So I have all these things broken out. I guess I'll do all of the mixing on these tracks then. So the way that these are routed, here, let me bring up the mixing pane. Sorry, let me just do some more. Goodbye. Of course, my head is in the way. One moment, please. So for the mixing of the drums and the routing, you can see I've got everything here. So drums, which is just the default name, it's the kick. So kick, snare, each tom has its own track, and then I have overheads to their own track, and then I have the room mics to their tracks, and then room mics are bused to a drum room bus. And then the rest of the kit is bused to a drum dry bus, and then those two group tracks are mixed into the final drum track. So what that does, it lets me edit things in a certain way. That's the way that I routed things and like to route things. So here on the kick, I guess we'll just start right off the bat. Let me get rid of the two room, not those. Jeez. All right. So kick. And as for processing, we've got an EQ. It's taking out tons of mid, adding a little bit of lows and doing a high pass just so it's not so boomy. We've got a gate so that we can get rid of some of the boominess on the compressor, but we want the compressor so that it kind of evens out the tone between each like kick hit. And then lastly, I have just the stock Cubase EQ, which as a spectrum analyzer, I can see what's happening to it, and I can also modify it. So we've just got some low end booming and then taking out a bunch of the low mids, and then, you know, the lowering the signal on the rest of it. If I kind of go through, turn each one of these on and off. So this is just the kick, how it comes from Invasion. Add my first EQ. And if I add the compressor without the gate, you can hear how boomy and gross it sounds. Because you want just that clean thump. Add the gate in. And then it still sounds a little bit weak, so then we beef it up with the last EQ. As for snare, now if I could redo it, I would redo the snares a little bit because they sound a little bit thin. But as far as processing goes, we've got tons of high end to get the snap and the snare rattle, a little bit of mids to fill that out, a little bit of bomb end and a high pass. Compressor, obviously. You want them to be pretty consistent sound to sound. And then here I'm just using it as a spectrum analyzer, this last EQ, just to see kind of what's going on. Toms. Yeah. So toms are a little bit difficult. So what I would normally do is I would turn on a spectrum analyzer, right? Figure out what the most resonant frequency is for that tom. Sometimes I would do this to try to find it. So I know that this is like what, 150-ish. And then up here on my EQ that I like to use, bump the 110, you know, try to find a frequency that's around there and bump it up a little bit. kill the mids almost completely here, and then add a little bit of high end so you get the stick snap. And then also gate because you don't want them to ring out too long, and then a compressor because they want to feel consistent and you want to feel the oomph from them, not just the like snap. And so that's done on every tom where I've gone through and tried to figure out what frequency I should try to focus on and accentuate. And they all probably have like slightly different compressor settings, just based on the frequency of the tom. Overheads. So the purpose of the overheads is to get a really nice cymbal sound and to kind of start gluing the other pieces together. So as far as processing these go from Invasion, I'm killing some of the mids, doing a high pass, and then bumping up the high frequencies, and then adding a pretty heavy compressor on there, just so that it sounds a little bit more washy and you can hear the cymbals like really clearly. Because then those, along with the rest of the drum tracks, are the drum dry sound. Which sounds pretty good by itself. So then the other thing to do is the room mics. So let me get rid of these. Room mics. So GetGood Drums has two separate like room mic, I don't know, tracks, microphones. There's a close one and a far one. I'm self-taught, so I don't really know how you're supposed to mix those. I don't know if like if you're supposed to pick one or the other, are they supposed to be different percentages? I don't know. So I just played around until I found something that sounded fairly good to me. And what I ended up doing was putting like a stereo imager on both of the tracks, and they're slightly different. So bring these up. So we've got the room far, which is like the most stereoized. And then we've got the room close, which is a little bit less stereoized. And then the two of them are sent to the drum room bus, which has an EQ on it. So we've got taken away almost all the low end here, high pass, taking away a bit of the upper mid range or treble frequencies, and then boosting the high end a lot. The way I like the room tone to be mixed in with the drums is that it's like an excited sound. You bring it up for like really excitable parts, and then you take it away for like really more intimate or quieter parts. So I want to use the EQ to accentuate the high end frequencies so that it just sounds more excitable. And then also real heavy, fast compression, just to get that really like blown out, excited sound. And then finally, on the final drum mix bus here, we've got a compressor, which is set to 50% wet dry to kind of like fake some parallel compression, because I wasn't sure how to do that when I set this project up. We've got a limiter to make sure it doesn't go above a certain volume level here. And then for this particular track, there's a DAW cassette, which is like a cassette tape emulation kind of plugin. And some other stuff, but I'll go into that when I go over this specific track. So that's really it as far as the drums go. I tried to mix them as best I could, and as sort of try to treat it as a realistic drum set as much as I could. Last thing to go over with the drums, I suppose, is the individual parts of the kit. So if you're unfamiliar with how Invasion works from GetGood Drums, you're given like a space and you have a certain amount of options, and then within those options you have certain like variations that you can choose for parts of the kit. So if I click on the little drop down on the snare here, we can choose from all these different types of snares. If I just swap it over to like a, no, we'll do something really weird, 12x5. A Slipknot drum. So for this particular album, I liked this one, and I didn't really change any of these per track. So I wanted to set up a, you can see my preset here, I wanted to set up a drum kit for Giovanna that would be her sound for every single track, and it would have all of the available options that she would play based on, you know, all of the MIDI tracks that I got back from her. So we've got 4 toms, we've got a double kick, we've got the snare, we've got hi-hat and some crashes and a ride. She doesn't really use any chinas, at least she didn't when she sent stuff to me. And she actually only used 2 crashes, but I liked having a little bit of variation in the sound, so I added a couple. So as for the actual pieces of the kit, we've got the Black Beauty snare, then for the kick drum, we've got the 22x18 Bubinga. For the toms, we've got a 10-inch, a 12-inch, 14-inch, and a 16-inch. And then for the hi-hats, we've got a 14-inch. And then we've got a 19-inch crash, 20-inch crash, 20-inch crash, and another 20-inch crash. And then we've got a 22-inch ride. And this is the kit that's used on the entire album. Alright, so processing on the, I guess we'll do bass first. It's a little bit more complicated than the guitars as far as plugins go. So on the bass, typical bass stuff, you've got an EQ, compressor, and I ended up using 2 different EQs here. So we can see the first EQ is taking down some of the high end, adding a little bit of the mid-range, and adding some bass tones with a high pass, just so that the bass sound gets out of the way of the drums. And then here on the SSL channel, you can see it's not really doing anything down here, but there's a high pass and a low pass. And then we've got a little bit of a boost at 2K, which is like the pick attack range for the bass. And then we're taking out some of the higher mid-range and then adding some of the lower mid-range here. And then compressor is pretty standard for bass. And then I have my Cubase EQ, which is just my spectrum analyzer just to see what's going on. And so if I turn these off, this is what the bass sounds like. So this was the direct sound from my AxeFX. I'll add the first EQ. Add my second EQ. And then I'll add the compressor. Pretty simple, and I used this plugin chain every song. Didn't really change that much. As for guitars are a whole different bag because I recorded a lot of guitars. So different parts have different pannings, different EQs on them, that kind of thing. If we, go in here and just listen to just this guitar, so we've got a left track and a right track. So these have their own EQ on them, right, that I've done. Looks like it's just a high pass, 300 hertz. which is common when I'm doing something higher up on the guitar register, because I don't want any like accidental frequencies or like rumbling frequencies or hiss or anything to get in the way of typically what another guitar is doing, which is like the rhythm part lower or playing power chords or whatever. So that's pretty common. This guy, let's see, panned full left, full right. And then if I go to the rhythm guitar, we've got panned left 60%, right 60%. And as far as EQ, we can see I'm taking out like 1.6K, which is probably where this lives. So a lot of the album is just recording a ton of guitar parts and then figuring out EQ-wise and panning-wise what I can do to make them sound more clear. You don't want them to be too overwhelming, but you want them to sort of be balanced and you can hear them clearly, but maybe one doesn't overpower as much as the other unless it's something that you want to happen. And then, of course, like I said, the EBO is just everywhere, so... And typically all of the EBO tracks just have a ton of reverb on them, which was my favorite reverb, which is the Eventide Black Hole. And really, that's it. So every single guitar track here is bussed to a like group track for the guitars. Let me find it right here. And the only plugin working on it is SSL EQ. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting out a lot of the low end as a high pass, doing a low pass, doing a little bit of bump in the very low 150 range, doing a little bit of a bump in the mid range, a little bit of a no bump here, bump up here, and like this is again like the pick attack kind of, and just add some presence. And that's the only processing on the guitars. They have tons of processing in the AxeFX, which is song specific pretty much. And then the last thing that I'll go over in this video is my my final mix chain here. So I liked to use this, which is the Abbey Road Mastering TG plugin. It's 5 different things that are all kind of grouped together in the same plugin. So we've got some balancing stuff here. We've got some EQ, tone shaping. It's working in the mid side option right now. So we've got one EQ applied to the mids, and one mid is in like mono, right? Like the center stereo field, and then the sides are like the side stereo fields. So we've got different EQs working on different parts to accentuate like the guitars, which are mostly mixed on the sides, and then the drums and the bass, which are mostly mixed in the center. We've got some limiter options here, just to do some like final limiting on the whole sound. We've got some filter options going on, and then there's like a stereo spread at the very end. So we've got that. We've got the tape emulation, which is just like an analog tape kind of emulation. I like the way it sounds. I always throw it on everything. I have Cubase's stock limiter that I've used for every project here. And then for a little bit further gentle tone shaping, I'm using this RS56. It's just doing like a very gentle bump in the bottom range and a little bit of a top end boost here. And then lastly, I've got my trusty LUFS meter, which is just like a loudness meter for both short-term and long-term. So this mixing, stereo mix bus, final output mix, whatever you want to say, this chain didn't change at all throughout any of the songs. So this is the same on every single song on the album. Yeah, and I think that covers everything that's global as far as the album is concerned. Guitars and synths and extra percussion changes on a song per song basis. But as far as like general tones for the album, we've got, you know, the guitars, the bass, the drums, and kind of how they're mixed and broken down. And that's it. If I did anything horribly wrong, you can let me know in the comments. I'll read them and either give my opinion on why I did something the way I did, or learn and find out something I didn't know. If you have any other tips for mixing, or, you know, whatever other channels you like to watch, be sure to let me know. That would be cool. I'm always on the lookout for some extra tutorials or extra tips and videos to watch. Yeah, and if you liked this video, be sure to check out my other videos that are coming. Maybe depending on when you're watching this will have already come out, but I wanted to do or song specific videos, so I can get into some of the specific sounds that are on some of the different parts of the album, because I'm kind of proud of some of the sounds and how they turned out. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, see you in the next one.